So trying to continue with the beautiful atmosphere that His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj has created by his presentation. The theme, the feeling of the Festival of Feeling just sticks in my mind. Sometimes people consider that bhakti is inferior because it doesn't deal, they think, with intellectualism as they know it. They think it's the yoga system for those who are not very erudite and sophisticated in their understandings, and therefore bhakti appeals to the emotions. But what we see in Ratha Yatra is the highest exemplar of the science of emotions. How to truly feel it, but feeling the most rare and confidential emotions that are packed into the Ratha Yatra festival. At all levels. Obviously, at the entry level, as Giriraj Maharaj was describing, the innocent bystanders watching. They're obviously not going to consciously enter into the depths of the feeling of the festival in terms of Mahaprabhu in the position of Srimati Radharani, Lord Jagannath is Krishna, and Srimati Radharani wants to bring Krishna away from the capital of opulence to the capital of sweetness. But while all that's going on, the attempt to bring Krishna back to Vrindavan and have him stay there, there is great mercy being distributed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You can see that in the example of Maharaj Prataparudra, who though was a great devotee, could not get the darshan of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He even threatened to give up his throne and become a beggar in the street, thinking, what's the use of my life if I can't have a darshan arranged with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? And he had all the devotees interceding on his behalf. It seemed futile, it seemed hopeless. Lord Chaitanya was dug in, as they say these days. He was very firm. I don't see kings. I don't even see them in my dreams, what to speak of real life. I don't have contact with such worldly personalities. So many devotees intervened on Prataparudra Maharaj's behalf. And this is where you see the value, the cumulative value of devotee intercession. When so many dear Vaishnavas are presenting your case, certainly at some point there'll be some effect. So it seemed so hopeless for Prataparudra. He didn't give up his hope, however. He kept associating with the Vaishnavas, and the Vaishnavas were actually devising ways how, in spite of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's refusal, these ways would somehow or other breach the defenses of Mahaprabhu, who actually, inwardly, of course, always wants to give out mercy. But he's also concerned with the profile. If the public sees that someone in saffron is intimately associating with a politician, a king, that will look very bad. Do you want to bring this disrepute upon me? So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, you can see this kind of back and forth between Mahaprabhu being externally very strict, like a thunderbolt, and internally very soft. So the Ratha Yatra ceremony came, and what did Maharaj Prataparudra do? We may pass over it very quickly, thinking, what's the big deal? He took a golden-handled broom and swept the street in front of Lord Jagannath's cart. So we might become mesmerized by a broom with a golden handle and forget the impact in the social climate of the time. Even today in India, if someone's a street sweeper, you don't exactly associate very closely with such a person. Yet, Prataparudra Maharaj, the king, was sweeping the street. Albeit with a golden-handled broom, still he was sweeping the street and for Lord Jagannath's pleasure. And he was also sprinkling the street with scented water. So this was a very humiliating act, as conceived of, as perceived in the social context of the time. Nowadays, of course, you do anything to get money. Sweep streets, clean latrines, doesn't matter. The more money you get, the higher your social position. But this was not the culture during the time of Mahaprabhu. So I'm saying this so that we can fix our mind on how monumental this act of Prataparudra was. And Mahaprabhu took it in that way. He saw that this devotee is taking up menial service for the pleasure of Lord Jagannath. This was noted by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in time, the mercy of Lord Chaitanya acted automatically, even without Mahaprabhu apparently being conscious that this was going on. But we have the Ratha Yatra procession itself. And there Mahaprabhu is doing mystical presentations. There were 7 kirtan parties, 4 in the front, 1 on each side, and 1 in the back. Yet Mahaprabhu was manifesting in each one of those parties and dancing. Very few devotees saw this, and Prataparudra was one of the very few. And his devotee mentors, like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, told him, "You are indeed exceptionally fortunate." We think, what's the big deal? Why didn't everyone see Mahaprabhu with his mystic expansions being present in every kirtan party? And each of the 7 kirtan parties thought, he's with us, he's not with the other parties. Well, yes, he's Lord Chaitanya, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can do all that. But we forget, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, Savasataham Hridi Sanivishto Matasritir Gyanamapolanam Cha. I'm within your heart. I control what you see. I control what you remember. I control what you forget. If Krishna doesn't want you to see him, you can't see him. But somehow or other, Prataparudra, because he had swept the floor in front of Lord Jagannath and previously had humbly so many times tried to see Mahaprabhu, he somehow received the darshan. Krishna is independent, and Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself. He's not precisely an avatar. He's Swayam Bhagavan. I often like to quote Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who says that both are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When Mahaprabhu wants to be the Supreme Enjoyer, he appears as Krishna. And when Krishna wants to taste what is love of him, wants to be a devotee, he appears as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I was speaking in New Dwarka a few days ago about during the Brahma Vimohana Leela, the bewilderment of Lord Brahma, when he confiscated the calves and cowherd boys. The whole village of Vrindavan was covered by Yogamaya. Even Balaram, the most intimate expansion of Krishna, practically there's no difference. Except Krishna's bluish, Balaram's whitish. Krishna likes to wear yellow cloth and Balaram likes to wear bluish cloth. But Balaram couldn't catch on for a whole year. Krishna didn't let him because Krishna was a little concerned. If Balaram knows that the original cowherd boys and calves are missing, he's going to feel separation from Sri Dhamma, from Sudama. Now you might say, well, what about Krishna himself? Does he feel separation from the original cowherd boys and calves? No, he was with them as an expansion. But Balaram wasn't there as an expansion. So for 1 year, Balaram couldn't detect what his brother had done. And finally, that's another Leela, so we won't go into it all. Finally, Balaram, as Yogamaya lifts the curtain successively in 4 phases, Balaram realizes, this is the work of my brother. Even I could not see through it. And then you have, in the 89th chapter of the 10th canto, Mahavishnu causing a scene just to be able to see Krishna. He caused the disappearance of 9 or so of the Brahmana's sons in Dwarka, disappearing, dying right after they're born. This is all arranged by Mahavishnu so that finally he could see Krishna. Yet when Krishna appears with Arjuna before Mahavishnu, Krishna and Arjuna pay their obeisances, just like he did to Govardhan Hill. So you might think, well, that means that Mahavishnu is the ultimate. But then, and Arjuna started thinking when he got back to Dwarka, I thought that Mahavishnu was the ultimate because Krishna and I bowed down to him, but he said that he took away all these Brahmana's sons just to be able to see Krishna. You mean Mahavishnu just can't come to Dwarka and see Krishna? So Krishna is the controller of our perception. And Maharaj Prataparudra during the Ratha Yatra was able to see Mahaprabhu's mysticism of dancing at each kirtan party. He was mesmerized by that scene. And the devotees told him, the few devotees who could see that he's seeing, they said, you are very fortunate. You have been endowed with this ability to have this darshan. So as Prataparudra is watching the ecstatic dancing of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and there is the core of the festival of feeling, the dancing of Mahaprabhu as he's in the role of Srimati Radharani, testing Jagannath, who's Krishna. Do you remember Vrindavan? Do you remember the Yamuna River? Do you remember the cows, Mother Yashoda, Nanda Maharaj, the Gopas, the Gopis? Do you remember? And Mahaprabhu would linger behind the rock cart to test Krishna. And Krishna would slow down, as Lord Jagannath Krishna would slow down the cart, come to a halt even to show, yes, I'm being sensitive, I remember. So while that inner emotional dynamic is going on, which is Ratha Yatra at its deepest level, beckoning Krishna back to Vrindavan, Mahaprabhu is doing the most ecstatic dancing, overwhelmed by feelings of separation. And Prataparudra Maharaj is watching this, and his royal aide, his assistant, Harishchandra, is standing in front of him just to make sure that Prataparudra has a clear vision. But in front of Harishchandra was Srivas Thakur. And Harishchandra wanted whoever's in front. He evidently didn't understand the glories of Srivas Thakur. he wanted whoever was in front of him to clear out so the king could have a full vision, full darshan. And so Harishchandra was pushing on the back of Srivas Thakur. In other words, can you please get out of the way? The king needs to see. But Srivas Thakur is so mesmerized by the sight of Lord Chaitanya dancing that he gets transcendently angry because someone's pushing him from behind, and there he is staring right at Mahaprabhu's dancing. So without even looking at who's behind him, he just slaps the person on the cheek. We don't recommend you do this. But these are devotees overwhelmed by ecstatic love for Krishna. As Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Madhya Lila chapter 23, you can't understand, even if you're the greatest learned scholar, you can't understand the person who has in their heart Krishna prema. So Srivas Thakur slapped him on the face, and Harishchandra was, well, what would you do if in the middle of the kirtan someone slapped you in the face? But Harishchandra was about to get an attitude. But Prataparudra, the king, who's right behind him, says, you are so fortunate. If only I could be slapped in the face by Srivas Thakur. These are Vaishnavas on the highest level. So what else? During the ecstatic dancing of Mahaprabhu, he's jumping in the air, he's falling on the ground, ecstatic foam is coming from his mouth, and fortunate devotees are scooping up the foam from the ground and eating it. Meanwhile, all the internal meanings of bringing Krishna back to Vrindavan are going on, as Giriraj Maharaj read from Prabhupada's lecture. And then suddenly Mahaprabhu falls on the ground. Usually there's Nityananda to catch him. Usually there's a couple of devotees, Mahaprabhu's handlers, you might say, to keep him from collapsing on the ground. But they were nowhere around, and he went straight to the ground, right at the feet of the king. And so Prataparudra just scoops him up and lifts him up. And then he gets what he thought was the most severe look of chastisement from Mahaprabhu. Oh, I've been touched by a king. Oh, how unfortunate I am. So Prataparudra was quite shaken up until Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya explained, this is Mahaprabhu's giving an external lesson, but inwardly he's actually pleased. But externally he has to show that a renunciate does not come under the influence of kings and politicians, so therefore he apparently had a severe reaction, but that's just the external. Just wait and you'll see. So that calmed Prataparudra down, who was thinking, I made a great offense. All he did was someone fell on the ground in front of him and he scooped the person up. And that person happened to be Mahaprabhu, but he was the king. And Mahaprabhu wanted to let his followers know, you have to be strict in this way. Well, inwardly Mahaprabhu was pleased. The proof is when the Ratha Yatra festival took a pause at a park, and Mahaprabhu and his associates went into the park and rested while countless persons were offering bhoga to Lord Jagannath everywhere. They could find an open space to a line of sight with the deity. They brought their offerings. Meanwhile, Mahaprabhu and his associates took rest in the park. Mahaprabhu was lost in transcendental ecstasy, transcendental fatigue. How is it that the Supreme Personality of God can get actually fatigued? No, it's a display of ecstasy. So he's laying there, lost in Vrindavan consciousness. Schooled by the devotees who had prepared Prataparudra Maharaj, Prataparudra Maharaj came up and approached the feet of Mahaprabhu, who was laying on the ground, resting from so much ecstatic dancing. The devotees told Prataparudra Maharaj, don't wear your royal clothes, dress like a Vaishnava, and approach Lord Chaitanya when he's resting in the park, laying down and recite verses from the Gopi Gita. So Prataparudra did that. He's acting under the guidance of his mentors. It's very important to have a mentor in bhakti, and he had the best mentors. So before touching Mahaprabhu's lotus feet, Prataparudra Maharaj took the blessings of the Vaishnavas and then proceeded to massage the feet of Mahaprabhu while reciting verses from the Gopi Gita. And you know that famous moment when Prataparudra Maharaj got to the verse Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam. One who spreads the glories of Krishna is the most munificent welfare worker. When he got to that point, Mahaprabhu cried out ecstatically, you are that most munificent person. You are that most munificent person because you've been reading these verses to me. Mahaprabhu gave no indication externally. He knew this was the king. Instead, what did he do? He embraced Prataparudra again and again. You are that most merciful person. You are that most merciful person. In the purports, Prabhupada says that inwardly Mahaprabhu knew this is the king. So you have to try to understand Mahaprabhu's ecstasy as much as we can. On the one hand, he didn't know. On the other hand, he did know, but that's not the point. The whole point is the ecstasy is flowing. So in this way, King Prataparudra got such an ocean of mercy, and the Vaishnavas were watching. And a point that's very important for me is that the Vaishnavas were all non-envious and congratulatory. Chaitanya Charitamrita says, when they saw Prataparudra Maharaj, the king, getting such a drowning of mercy, the Vaishnavas were all, their minds were open and blissful. I always like to meditate on that phrase. Whenever you see a Vaishnava doing something superlative, instead of, well, why does he or she get all the credit? I can do big things too. Instead, your mind is open. Blissful. How wonderful. So Srila Prabhupada carefully explains to us that this is how a real Vaishnava reacts to the glories of other devotees. And it's something that we have to aspire for. You may think either it comes naturally or it doesn't. So you ask yourself, what do I have to do? Just, as they say, fake it until I make it? No. Cry out. Beg the Panchatattva, please teach me the art of how to swim in the ocean of Vaishnava Sangha. Equip me with those transcendental skills. You have to beg for it. You can't, as I often point out, just rely upon mundane social skills like how to win friends and influence people. Any of you read that book? Yes. It's all about how to make people think you care about them so they'll do what you want. No, Vaishnava Sangha relies on a different dynamic. And we require empowerment by Krishna. How do I deal with Vaishnavas? So you see, in the case of Prataparudra Maharaj, he had the best mentors and he followed their advice and he did menial service for Lord Jagannath, which pleased Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immensely. His menial service was specifically noted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In fact, while in the garden, in the park, when Prataparudra is massaging Mahaprabhu's lotus feet and reading those verses, and Mahaprabhu is being overwhelmed by ecstasy, he says, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" And he says, "Das, Das, Anudas. I'm the servant of your servant." Teaching us what is the highest position in bhakti. So on this day of the festival of feelings, we can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the Aishvarya Sagar, the ocean of opulence, and then to the ocean of sweetness, that is Vrindavan. And later there's going to be a mock argument between Srivas Thakur and Swarup Damodar as to which is better, the Vaikuntha opulence or the Vrindavan sweetness. Srivas Thakur is actually Narada Muni, as Lord Chaitanya points out. And Narada Muni is basically a Vaikuntha devotee, although he's got special access into Krishna Lila. But he's basically a Vaikuntha devotee. So when he hears Swarup Damodar glorifying the gopis, Srivas Thakur playfully takes on the Vaikuntha point of view. Vrindavan? What's so great about Vrindavan? It's just a bunch of peacock feathers, forest minerals, a bit of yogurt here and there. What's the big deal? But look at Vaikuntha, my goddess of fortune. Lakshmi sits on a throne of inconceivable jewels. Her opulence is beyond comparison. You see, when Lord Jagannath leaves Jagannath Temple, which is Dwarka, he asks permission of the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi. I've been with you in solitude for, was it 14 or 15 days? 15. I've been with you in solitude for 15 days before Ratha Yatra. Now it's time for me just to take a little ride. I'll be back soon. So she gives him permission, Chaitanya Charitamrita explains. But then he doesn't come back. He overstays. And so then you have the Lakshmi Vijay Utsava festival, the festival of the conquest by Lakshmi Devi, otherwise known as Hera Panchami. So Lakshmi Devi is going to chastise Lord Jagannath. Go find him. She's going to find him and bring him back. So that's why Srivas Thakur is getting enlivened, and Swarup Damodar is responding to the egotism, the pure egotism shown by Lakshmi Devi of Vaikuntha. Swarup Damodar is responding by pointing out Gopi Mana, the pride of the gopis. Swarup Damodar says about Lakshmi Devi and her associates, I've never seen such egotism before. And then Lord Chaitanya seizes the time and says, well, can you tell me about the egotism of Vrindavan? And Swarup Damodar gets into it. At which point, Srivas Thakur has to challenge back. What is this talk about Vrindavan? Why does Krishna leave the jewels of Dwarka just for the flower gardens of Srimati Radharani? So then, hearing the protests of Srivas Thakur, Lord Chaitanya reminds him, you're Narada Swabhava. You're actually in the nature of Narada Muni. But who are you talking to? Do you realize who you're talking to? You're talking to Swarup Damodar, who is a Shuddha Brijavasi. He's a pure resident of Vrindavan. So how can you give this opulence spiel to him? And then Sri Damodar feels encouraged by Mahaprabhu standing up for him, and he just presents a whole scientific analysis of the wealth of Braj. The ground is all Chintamani stones. The water is all nectar. The trees are all Kalpavriksha, desire trees. The cows are all Kamadhenus, wish-fulfilling cows. Every step is a dance. Every word is a song. Srivas Thakur admits defeat by becoming overwhelmed with ecstasy and slapping under his armpits and making noises. And then a massive kirtan breaks out. And it goes on and on and on. The kirtan reaches such a peak of intensity that in the middle of it, Lord Chaitanya appears as they didn't get this one, Maharaj. Lord Chaitanya appears in the middle of the kirtan as? Yes, that's Srimati Radharani. And Lord Nityananda is watching from a respectful distance because Nityananda is Balaram and he doesn't interfere or, shall we say, put his nose into Krishna's innermost leelas. So the kirtan continues on and on and on at such a pace, and the devotees are getting transcendently exhausted. So finally, Sri Damodar and Nityananda, they devise a means to get Mahaprabhu to stop the kirtan. So that's how the Ratha Yatra ceremony culminates with Srimati Radharani appearing right in the middle of the kirtan. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.